Well, good morning. Greg's more practiced at this than I am. He would have thought to walk up here before the video ended. Well, good morning again, and we are continuing our Believe message series with our journey through the Gospel of John. And my title today for the message is From Despair to Dependence, and our text is from John 6, 1 through 5. Greg covered chapter 5 last Sunday, and with the miracle of Jesus healing the lame man. And like he said and described at the start of chapter 5, chapter 6 also starts with the same few words, sometime after this. Let's go ahead and read. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs that he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, "It would take more than a half year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite." Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will that go among so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. After the people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world." Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. Let's pray. Oh God, I offer this time to you, and I ask that you would speak to us this morning. Thank you for your word, and have your way in our hearts and minds. In Jesus' name. Well, this miracle that we just read is commonly referred to as Jesus feeds the 5,000. And there were actually many more than 5,000 people there for this, because that just accounted for the men, so there would have been women and children there too. And so this miracle was performed in a very large crowd. And Greg talked about escalation last week, where in Jesus' ministry at the time, it was really escalating. And so here again, this would have only increased that and would have definitely launched Jesus even more into the public eye. And of course, there wasn't modern ways of spreading the news of Jesus. He wasn't being interviewed by Oprah or followed around by the paparazzi, and nobody was posting pictures of his miracles on Instagram. That wasn't how it was spreading. But it was being written down by the disciples, and aside from the resurrection, the telling of Jesus feeding the 5,000 is the only miracle recorded in all 4 Gospels. But if you think about it, in addition to those written accounts, there would have been 5,000 plus eyewitness accounts that day. And not even just eyewitnesses, they were participating in that miracle that day. What an amazing experience that would have been. And the news of Jesus must have spread like wildfire after that. Can you imagine? And so the Pharisees and the Roman officials and those that felt threatened by Jesus would have definitely been realizing this is a problem we have and it's not going away. Now, for me personally, when I read the accounts from Jesus' life, I am in awe. I love hearing the stories of his miracles. And, my bent in life is I love getting to know people. I love trying to figure out, how they feel, what they think, and why they're wired the way they are. And And that's just how I approach things. And so when I read the Bible, I like to imagine what it would be like to be in the shoes of the people that were there at the time. And so I am inviting you to imagine with me this morning as we look at this account of this miracle. First, that we're going to imagine what it would have been like to be in Philip's shoes. And then we'll come back around to it and imagine what it would have been like to be in that little boy's shoes. So let's reread the part about Philip first. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, "It would take more than a half year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite." Now, since we're just imagining here, I'm not trying to give you commentaries on this. I'm just imagining with you. But when I read Philip's response here, I don't know, to me it sounds a little defensive. You know? That there's even an exclamation point at the end of his sentence there. Now, in the original manuscripts, those wouldn't exist. They didn't have marks like that, from what I understand. But, you know, when the translators translated this to English, somebody thought it should have an exclamation point, so somebody's with me on that. But I even picture Philip's voice kind of rising as he's saying this, or a little squeaky at the end. Maybe that's just me, and I'm not down on him for that. Actually, when I look at Philip's response, I feel like I can relate to him. I mean, if Jesus had tested me, if he asked me, "Hey, where are we going to get bread to feed 5,000 plus people?" I would have definitely failed that test. That would have been a really rough one for me. I would have felt pressured at that point. I would have felt like, well, that question, that must mean, oh, it's on me to feed all these people? And then my head would have started spinning and started freaking out inside. And then if I was standing there like Philip when Andrew brought the boys' lunch up, that would not have helped. That would have even stressed me out more. I mean, come on, 5,000 people and all you could come up with was one boy's lunch. Why are you even bothering mentioning this? Well, all this imagining, when I read this part of the story, makes me think of mashed potatoes. So I have a story about mashed potatoes. Some of you may have heard, but humor me because I'm going to tell it again. Back in the 90s, Greg was a single dad with 3 little boys, and this was due to circumstances beyond his control, but he's an amazing, amazing dad, and he sacrificed so much and did all he could to love God and give his kids a good life. And it blew my mind to see him do the right thing, even though it cost him everything, and to be faithful even when he was attacked for doing the right thing. And the selflessness and love for God, I fell head over heels in love with him. And I can tell you that has only grown over the past 27 years. And he's even more of that man today, devoted and selfless, that I fell in love with. And so we did get married, obviously. And aren't I brave for putting this up there? When we got married, the boys were 2, 4, and 6 years old. Aren't they cute? The little ties and suspenders. And aren't Greg and I like classic 90s here? I mean, Greg's mullet, and my hair is probably more of a carryover from the 80s, but I loved big hair, so I was keeping that going. And we had fun here. I love this picture. So I actually grew up in the Midwest, not in Colorado. I had loving parents. I'm the youngest of 3 girls. That's me in the middle. And we didn't have a lot when I was growing up, but we definitely didn't feel like we went without either. Dad worked at Snap-on Tools, making tools there in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and Mom stayed home with us when we were babies. And she was good at making a dollar stretch. In fact, she made a lot of our clothes when we were little. I think she has us looking pretty stylish here in this picture. In fact, I noticed Mom's black patent boots there, and I think she's looking pretty fashionista herself. I'm impressed. Well, she also saved money with her cooking. She would cook a lot of casseroles. and that would help money stretch. And I loved her casseroles. She'd make a casserole for our little family of 5, and there would always be leftovers to send with Dad to work the next day in his lunchbox, and all of that worked really well for us. Now, skip forward to me marrying Greg and having my own little family of 5 to cook for. Well, we also didn't have a whole lot starting out, and I had to make money stretch too. And so I did ask my mom for her casserole recipes. Thought that was smart. There was no way I was going to try to make clothes for the boys, and they are very, very happy about that. That would have been tragic. So I didn't try that. However, I did save a buck by cutting their hair. I know. They still razz me about the haircuts back in the day, and that was a day of celebration when we decided we could afford for them to get a professional haircut. Poor things, I understand. Now, when it came to cooking, I could follow a recipe, I could follow directions and make a meal that way, but I'm not an experienced cook. I hadn't done much cooking growing up with 2 older sisters. They were the ones that always chipped in and kind of did that, and I'm the youngest, I got away with a lot. But so when it came to me cooking, I didn't have tons of experience there. And now when I'm making those same casseroles that my mom did, I was shocked that that dish was licked clean and there was not enough for seconds, let alone leftovers. And of course, little kids are not shy about telling you, I'm still hungry. Is there something else we can eat? They were so sweet and they loved everything I cooked, but I couldn't seem to fill them up. The growing boys thing, that's real. I grew up with sisters and we didn't have that problem. Throw in 3 boys and I could not fill them up for the life of me. And as you can imagine, in this phase, I was overwhelmed with acclimating to my new life. And Greg was incredible. He went above and beyond in everything and making that doable for me. But it just took some time for me to get the hang of some things like cooking. Now, at the time, I don't know why, but it didn't click for me that in the house we had, I didn't have a regular size oven. My oven was smaller, but I didn't realize it was smaller because of my inexperience. And so when I made a casserole, I didn't see a way to make more food. How was I going to make more casserole? Nothing would fit in the oven. And so I was just doing my best with what I knew to do, but I was in kind of despair. God, what am I going to do? How do I fill these boys up? And God gave me the idea of mashed potatoes. So potatoes are cheap. They're filling. You don't need an oven to make mashed potatoes. And the boys love mashed potatoes. So I started making mashed potatoes with everything. I still made Mom's casseroles, but I just made it with potatoes on the side. And so we'd have our chicken noodle casserole with mashed potatoes, cheesy broccoli rice casserole and mashed potatoes, taco casserole and mashed potatoes. Mashed potatoes with everything. But I did it. They were full. Finally filled those boys up. And so that was a victory, but alongside that, I still had another mountain to climb because, what am I going to do when I have guests over for dinner? I don't even know how to cook now for guests. But there we are. Sorry, it was blinking in front of me. So that was my new thing to have to overcome, and I was nervous when we ever had guests over, and you probably hear that and think I'm kind of neurotic at this point, but for me, that struggle was real at the time. Thankfully, eventually I did acclimate to this new routine of life, figured out I had a small oven, and was able to figure out how to work around that. But that's why when I read the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000, I think of mashed potatoes. And that's why, like I said, if Jesus had asked me, where are we going to get bread to feed 5,000 people, I would have definitely failed. I didn't have enough faith to feed the 5, let alone the 5,000, right? What was I going to do with that? But mashed potatoes started to teach me about dependence on God rather than on myself. I was so in my head about what family dinner was supposed to look like and my ability to cook or provide that meal and to measure up to my mom. I mean, I didn't even realize the baggage that I was unpacking at the time. But I learned to let go of the fear of not having enough, of not being enough, of mashed potatoes not being good enough, and I let go. I had to learn to depend on God and not get so caught up in things depending on me. Now, it's okay to put effort into providing a nice meal. That's great. I'm not trying to say that's a problem at all. Have fun with that. Bless people. We have some people with an amazing gifts of hospitality right here, and run with that. That's great. I'm simply saying to do it from a place of peace and dependence on God and blessing and generosity, and not complication of fear or pressure or pride or self-focus of any kind. So in that way, when I'm understanding my dependence on God, I feel more humble than afraid. And I simply try to serve or give what I have, even if it feels like it's not enough at times. And this describes one aspect of what it's like to experience dependence on God. And I know it's not always easy to let go. Like the analogy of the hand stuck in the cookie jar, where the child sticks their hand into the cookie jar, feels around for the biggest cookie, grabs a hold of that, and then all of a sudden, can't get my hand out. And he's crying and asking for help. He doesn't know what to do. He's stuck in this cookie jar because it never crosses his mind to let go of the cookie so that his hand can come out. So we need to not be trapped by cookies. And I think the devil likes to give us lots of cookies to go after. So we should let go. We need to let go of the fear, of the pride, of what we look like, of expectations, and whatever that is, and instead be open-handed with God, ready for what he has for us. And that's dependence on him. But again, before this breakthrough for me, I feel I would have been struggling like I imagine Philip was. And hopefully now, if I felt despair, instead of reacting out of feeling that I'm not enough, I hope I would answer out of my dependence on God. So that if I was asked where we're going to get bread for 5,000 plus people, hopefully I'd answer with open hands to the Lord, and I'd be saying, where do we do that, Lord? Where should I go? What should I do? You already have a way forward. Help me understand what that is so that I can follow in that. Well, thank you to Philip for that lesson, and thank you, God, for mashed potatoes, and because he knows how to get through to this thick skull, and sometimes he has to use strange things like mashed potatoes, but he does get through. So thank you. Let's go back to Jesus feeding the 5,000 again and talk about the boy with the loaves and fishes. So imagine with me being in his shoes now. As I said, this is the miracle that's recorded in all 4 Gospels. And so if you look at the other accounts in the other Gospels, you get an even fuller picture of all that happened that day. So we're going to read a couple of lines from the Gospel of Mark to see what he said. "How many loaves do you have?" Jesus said. He asked, "Go and see." When they found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. So what we see in that simple statement is that boy didn't just happen to be standing around. He wasn't right there. Jesus told the disciples to go and see what was out there, what food there was. And so they went out into the crowd, And imagine with me, I wonder how those conversations went. You know, the disciples are going out amongst 5,000 plus people, and they're going, hey, anybody got any food? Anyone? Anyone? I mean, crickets? Like, wow. 5,000 people and only one little boy thought to bring a lunch? That blows my mind. And I don't know how hard the disciples tried to find more food than that, but eventually they bring this one boy back with them to where Jesus was. And Andrew says, "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many?" So when those disciples are out amongst the crowd asking who has food, what do you think was going through the boy's head as that was happening? I mean, no one else is speaking up to offer anything. Do you think he was nervous? Or maybe he just answered right away without thinking, "I've got some," when he heard them calling out? I wonder, did he get scoffed at, eye rolled at him because what he had to offer was so little? I mean, if you look at what Andrew said here, Andrew even describes it as small loaves and small fish. I mean, at this point, who cares if they were huge fish or huge loaves, because they are nowhere near going to feed 5,000 plus people. But Andrew has to point out that they're small. Have you ever offered something to help out and felt like it was described as small or not enough? Because in that crowd, there had to be men that were older than this boy, more experienced, more important, with more money and influence. And I wonder how many of them actually had some food and just were ignoring the call to answer the disciples or even Jesus and offer what they had. But the boy is willing to offer what he had, even though he might get laughed at for how worthless it seemed. And I'm guessing it took a bit of courage or maybe even some innocence for him to respond. Oh, to have childlike faith like that. I remember times when I was a kid where I would speak up, forgetting to be afraid or self-conscious about it. And then for some of us, life where people drain that out of us a bit, and we're told, who are you to think what you have to offer matters? That one little line almost kept me from living a life boldly for Jesus. Who am I to say anything? Who am I to do anything? Because if I have to believe what I have to offer is worthy, then, or that it measures up, or that it's good enough, then I might as well quit and sit down now, because I know my faults all too well. And I'm not good at pretending. Even the games where you're supposed to lie, I'm terrible at that. I can't fake it. I'm just not good at that. So I definitely can't talk myself or anyone else into thinking that those faults don't exist in me or that they don't matter. And of course, when I look around, I'm always seeing somebody who has something more worthwhile to offer than I do. So how about you? How do you measure your worth or the worth of others? What measure do you use to deem what you have to offer as worthwhile? Is it being rich or important, having nice stuff, being good looking, or just better than the guy next to you at least? Is it those kind of worldly measures? Is it comparing yourself with others? And because if that was the boy's measure in the miracle, maybe he would have kept quiet about his loaves and fish. And then maybe we wouldn't have that miracle. One that has had eternal impact. We're even talking about it today. What I know, though, is that what that boy gave to Jesus was definitely not enough. Yet when he gave it to Jesus, it was miraculously expanded and used for good. Take the example of the widow's mite, another account in the Bible. She was scoffed at for giving so little when she came to the temple, but Jesus saw that and honored her. Not because her gift measured up to what others gave, but because she gave generously, even out of her own need, and with the right motive. And that's worth more in God's economy than those that give what they don't even need just so that people will be impressed. So let's give, like I imagine that boy did, with dependence on God's measure for what's worthwhile, and with things like obedience, the motive of your heart, worship, your love for Jesus, your love for others, those kind of measures that God cares about. And let's depend on him even when it seems like it might not be enough. Remembering that anything that we have to give, it all comes from God anyway. So I don't know if you guys grew up in Sunday school, but I did. And Mom and Dad would give me a quarter to take with me to Sunday school. And in kids' church, I was so excited to put my little quarter in. Either the basket would come by or you'd go up front and you put it in the little piggy bank for kids' church. And that was fun for me. And of course, I'm a child at that point, and so I don't have my own money. So anything that I have to give would be what my parents give me to give. And I actually could have kept that quarter, could have kept it in my pocket. Nobody would have known, or bought a gumball, the gumball machine and could have bought a gumball with it. And but that would have been so sad. I mean, here my parents are providing a roof over my head. They feed me, they clothe me, they care for me in every way. And then how sad would it be for me to take this quarter that they give me too, and then keep that for myself and not give it to God? That would be sad. And even more than a parent, let's understand what God is in our lives that way. That we depend on him for creation, for life itself, the warmth of the sun. Anything that we have to give comes from him. And so let's be sure we honor him with what he gives us to give. And even if what we have to offer seems like it won't make a difference, I mean, I could have thought as a kid that gumball in my mouth would make more of a difference to me than that quarter will to the church. But that's not God's measure. His idea of worth is different than the world's, and what that choice would do to my heart would be more important to God than the actual amount of that it's worth. So what you give to God is an expression of your dependence on him. Your dependence on him rather than yourself or money or this world. And when we give, it's defeating the enemy's attempt to keep our heart tied to this world. And it also provides opportunity for others to get an opportunity to know Jesus and be set free too. It has eternal impact. And that is way better than a gumball. So, as we have looked at what it would be like to be in Philip's shoes and in that boy's shoes, what I want to stand out is that our understanding of our dependence on God, it's deeply important to our well-being. And the example of mashed potatoes, it's a lighthearted example of what I learned about dependence on God at that time. But I also had a dark time too, a dark night of the soul, an existential crisis type time in the early days of motherhood for me. And I was raised to be responsible and independent and to do the right thing because then you get good things back. And that worked for me a lot of the time. Do good and you get good things back. Hand in your homework, you get good grades, all of that. But when I got into a situation where I was doing what I thought was right and getting negative in return, getting bad things in return, and my efforts to improve my situation or improve me or get understanding from God, it was all failing at that time. And I I was in a place of despair. I remember a moment where I was just on the floor, and I felt like a grease spot on the floor, and I was just in despair, and I didn't know how to get up from there and keep going. And I was crying out to God. And in my mind, I was thinking, well, I should be able to hold on to hope. I should have that. That should be able to get me up. But for me at that moment, hope felt like something that was in the future, something that I had to, if I could even muster the hope up. So for me, it wasn't getting me up from the floor in that moment. And then I figured, well, I should have more faith or trust. And that's true, that would help. But for me, emotionally in that moment, in my head, that felt futuristic too. It wasn't what was going to get me up from that floor in that moment. But I kept crying out to God, and what God gifted to me that did get me up off that floor was a new level of dependence on him. The kind of dependence where you breathe him in so that you even have the strength to take the next step. And the kind that carries you through even when your circumstances aren't changing and you don't know how long it's going to take for things to be different or to work out. One of my favorite stories in the Bible is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when they faced the fiery furnace. And we don't have time to read it, but in summary, the king told these three young men that they needed to renounce God or he was going to throw them in the furnace and they were going to burn to death. And even in the face of death, they said, God can save us from the fire, but even if he doesn't, yet will I serve him. Now, they could have been in despair. They could have thought, well, there's no choice here. I'm facing death. I should get a pass on not having to do the right thing right now. Anybody would understand. But they didn't. Instead, they expressed their commitment to serve him no matter what, and they were thrown in that fire. But instead of burning up, everyone saw that not only were those three men in there walking around just fine, there was a fourth man in there because Jesus was with them. And when they were let out of that furnace, they were not only not harmed at all, they didn't even smell like smoke. And I realize one of the reasons that this story is a favorite of mine is that their commitment to serve God, even if he didn't change their circumstances, resulted in them being gifted with a greater understanding of dependence on God. And they experienced God being with them through the fire. That's how I got up off the floor. I was committed to do the right thing, even if my circumstances didn't change. And God gifted me with a new level of dependence on him, which gave me strength to carry on. And I did experience God being with me through the fire so that I didn't succumb to the flames. And I pray that I continue to grow in that and I get better at that kind of dependence to where I don't even smell like smoke on the other side of a fire. That's what I'm asking for. Greg, if you could come on up, he's going to lead us in communion. There are many dear friends going through crazy, rough stuff right now. And I've cried tears for them as I prepared to this message. And dependence on God in no way minimizes the fact that a furnace is not where any of us want to be. But those times are going to hit whether we know God or not, whether we're walking with him or not. And I pray that as you cry out to God, that he gifts you with greater and greater levels of dependence on him, where you're breathing in Jesus and he's there with you so that you are not suffocated by any smoke or fire. And I'm a witness that that's real. God loves you. His grace is sufficient for you, and he will redeem every bit of suffering that you experience. And having a church community like this one is one of the big tools that God uses to help carry us through. Let's pray. Oh God, I give this to you. I ask, Father, for your dependence in greater and greater ways, that we understand what it means to depend on you, to walk with you, to receive from you. God, I feel like